Tonight we're going to talk about a game that shouldn't have worked. A horror game that gave you combat expertise, that stripped away the atmospheric tension for kinetic energy, that cared more about spectacle than scarcity, and that turned nearly every established rule of survival horror on its head to see what would happen. This is about Resident Evil 4, the 2005 action horror game that arrived 4 years after Code Veronica continued the series formula, looked at everything Capcom had built since 1996, and decided to burn it all down and start fresh. Close your eyes if you'd like. We're going to move slowly through this, examining how a team that went through 4 scrapped versions, 6 years of troubled development, and countless directorial shifts created something that didn't just redefine its own franchise, but reshape third-person games forever. This is a careful examination of what made Resident Evil 4 different, what rules it broke, and why those breaks created one of the most influential games ever made. We'll compare Resident Evil 4 to what came before and what came after, because the deviations only make sense in context. Survival horror in 2005 had expectations, conventions, and a formula that worked brilliantly. Resident Evil 4 examined that formula and decided that safety, scarcity, and vulnerability, the very pillars that define the genre, could be inverted, transformed, or replaced entirely with something nobody expected would work. And as always, if you enjoy this content, make sure to subscribe for more deep dives, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you are listening from. The foundation, what survival horror was before RE4. To understand what Resident Evil 4 broke, we need to understand what it inherited. Resident Evil launched in 1996 and didn't just establish survival horror as a genre, it codified it into law. The game placed you in the Spencer Mansion as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine, elite stars operatives investigating bizarre murders. What you found was a pharmaceutical corporation's bioweapons research gone catastrophically wrong, creating zombies and mutated creatures that stalked elegant hallways. The formula Resident Evil established became gospel. Fixed camera angles showing pre-rendered backgrounds that were beautiful but restrictive. Tank controls that made your character turn in place rather than move fluidly. Limited inventory forcing constant decisions about what to carry. Item boxes for storage scattered at safe rooms. Ink ribbons consumed to save your progress, making even saving a resource decision. Green herbs for healing. Ammunition scarcity forcing you to decide whether every encounter was worth the bullets. Enemies that followed patterns you could learn and eventually master. The genius was in the restriction. You weren't powerless. You had weapons, you could fight, but you were constrained enough that every decision mattered. Do I fight these zombies or dodge around them? Do I use my shotgun shells now or save them for later? Can I make it back to a save room, or should I consume an ink ribbon here? The horror came from resource management and spatial navigation rather than pure helplessness. Resident Evil 2 expanded this in 1998, giving players Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield navigating Raccoon City's police station during the outbreak. The setting changed, urban instead of isolated mansion, but the rules stayed the same. Fixed cameras, tank controls, limited resources, save point scarcity. You played as a rookie cop and a college student, less trained than STARS operatives, but the gameplay kept you competent enough to survive if you were careful. Resident Evil 3, Nemesis in 1999, added the Nemesis Stalker who pursued you relentlessly, creating panic through constant pursuit, rather than just spatial puzzles. Code Veronica in 2000 moved to real-time 3D backgrounds instead of pre-rendered ones, but maintained everything else: the angles, the controls, the resource scarcity. the fundamental DNA of survival horror as Capcom had defined it. Other games adopted and adapted this template. Silent Hill in 1999 used the same basic framework, but emphasized psychological horror over biological threat. Dino Crisis applied it to dinosaurs. The formula was proven, refined, commercially successful. By the early 2000s, survival horror had rules everyone understood. Limited resources, careful management, pattern recognition, spatial mastery, vulnerability through constraint. You learned the systems, you got better at navigating them, but you never truly felt powerful. The fear came from scarcity and limitation. Into this established genre walked Resident Evil 4, and it agreed with almost nothing. The development hell that built a masterpiece. The story of how Resident Evil 4 came to exist is almost as important as the game itself, because understanding the chaos explains why the final product was so radical. Development began in 1999, right after Resident Evil 3's success, with Capcom's biggest franchise preparing its PlayStation 2 debut. Management's directive was simple but imposing. Make something cooler and edgier than anything before it. Series director Shinji Mikami handed control to Hideki Kamiya, who had directed Resident Evil 2. Kamiya's vision was dramatically different, fast, stylish, action-focused. This first version featured supernatural elements, a protagonist fighting with almost superhuman abilities, combat that emphasized spectacle over survival. It was exciting, visually impressive, but Mikami felt it strayed too far from what Resident Evil was. The project was too good to waste, though, so instead of scrapping it entirely, Capcom spun it off as a new franchise. That became Devil May Cry in 2001, which created the spectacle fighter genre and became hugely successful on its own terms. But Resident Evil 4 still needed to exist. The series' reputation demanded a proper, fourth numbered entry. Development restarted under a new director, Hiroshi Shibata, now as a GameCube exclusive following a deal with Nintendo. This Fog version of the game featured Leon Kennedy infiltrating Umbrella's headquarters, using mysterious supernatural powers in his hand. The fog served practical purposes, hiding draw distance limitations, and created atmosphere, but the project lacked the spark needed. It was visually impressive, but didn't cohere into something special. After significant development time, this version was scrapped too. The third attempt, shown at E3 2003, became known as the Hookman version. This iteration leaned heavily into paranormal horror, placing Leon in a haunted castle fighting supernatural enemies, living dolls, animated armor, ghostly figures. The tone felt more like Silent Hill than Resident Evil. It displayed mechanics that would survive into the final game. The over-the-shoulder camera, laser sight aiming, quick-time events, but technical issues emerged. The game was designed to shift between reality and Leon's hallucinations, requiring the GameCube to render two versions of the same room simultaneously. The hardware struggled. This version was abandoned after several months of refinement proved the concept wasn't technically viable. A fourth version reportedly returned to traditional Resident Evil elements, zombies, Umbrella Corporation, more familiar ground, but this too was scrapped after a few months when developers realized it felt too formulaic, too much like what they'd already done. The team was exhausted, morale was low, and 3 years had passed with nothing to show for it. Multiple directors had come and gone, staff had left. The project felt cursed. Shinji Mikami, watching his franchise languish, finally took direct control as director in 2003. His assessment was brutal. The old gameplay system were chaining the team down creatively. Fixed cameras and tank controls had defined Resident Evil, but they'd also become limitations. The team was tired of working within those constraints. If Resident Evil 4 was going to justify 6 years of development hell, it needed to break free entirely. This decision to reinvent the series fundamentally rather than refine it was radical. Resident Evil wasn't just Capcom's biggest franchise, it had defined an entire genre. Fans had expectations. The series had an identity. Throwing that out risked alienating the audience that had made Resident Evil successful. But Mikami and his team made a calculated bet. Players were ready for something new, even if they didn't know it yet. The final version, the fifth attempt, came together rapidly once the direction was clear. Mikami brought fresh energy and firm creative vision. The GameCube's hardware capabilities were fully understood by this point. The team knew what worked and what didn't after years of experimentation. When Resident Evil 4 finally launched in January 2005 for GameCube, it had been in development for 6 years, across 5 different builds, with multiple directors, numerous staff changes, and enough scrapped content to fill several complete games. That tumultuous development wasn't just background noise. It informed the final product's willingness to take risks, to throw out what didn't work, to iterate ruthlessly until something special emerged. The game that finally released was the result of learning what Resident Evil shouldn't be, through 4 failed attempts before discovering what it could be. Breaking Rule 1, the camera that gave you control. Resident Evil's fixed cameras weren't just an aesthetic choice. They were the foundation of its horror. The static angles created 3 distinct sources of tension. First, they showed you what the game wanted you to see, often hiding threats until the perfect moment. A zombie around a corner you couldn't see yet, a door about to burst open. The camera controlled revelation, creating manufactured scares through visibility control. Second, fixed cameras made navigation itself a puzzle. When the camera angle shifted mid-hallway, your directional input had to change to maintain the direction you were moving. This created the infamous tank controls necessity. You couldn't just push left to move left because left changed meaning when cameras shifted. You had to think spatially, maintain orientation mentally, adjust constantly. This cognitive load created low-level tension throughout exploration. Third, fixed cameras from pre-rendered backgrounds allowed incredible visual fidelity. The Spencer Mansion, the Raccoon City Police Station, these locations looked photorealistic because they weren't being rendered in real time. Artists could craft every shadow, every detail, creating atmospheric spaces that the PlayStation hardware couldn't have generated during gameplay. The trade-off was static viewpoints, but the visual payoff was worth it. This system had become synonymous with survival horror. Players learned to read camera transitions as potential danger points. Safe rooms always had the best, most comfortable camera angles. Dangerous areas deliberately used awkward views. The language was established and understood. Resident Evil 4 discarded this entirely. Mikami and his team implemented a dynamic third-person camera that sat directly behind Leon's right shoulder. When you moved, the camera followed smoothly. When you aimed, it zoomed in tight over that shoulder, providing a clear view down your weapon's laser sight. The camera was now a tool for player agency rather than a method of control removal. Director Shinji Mikami later admitted he didn't fully understand how revolutionary this would be. In interviews discussing the remake decades later, he explained that to the development team, the over-the-shoulder perspective just felt better, more intuitive, more natural for what they were building. They weren't trying to innovate or be groundbreaking. They were solving problems with their game's design. They wanted Leon to fight multiple enemies simultaneously, wanted combat that rewarded precision and spatial awareness, wanted players to feel like capable agents rather than spatially disoriented survivors. The technical implications were enormous. Moving from pre-rendered backgrounds to real-time 3D environments meant everything had to be rendered on the fly. The GameCube was powerful enough to handle this, barely, though compromises appeared. The game ran in a letterboxed format to reduce the rendering load, with black bars top and bottom. An actual 16:9 widescreen mode wouldn't appear until the PlayStation 2 port later that year. But what the team lost in visual fidelity, and the graphics still looked exceptional for 2005, they gained in player comfort and agency. You could see threats clearly. You understood your position in space intuitively. Combat became about aiming skill and tactical positioning, rather than fighting both enemies and camera angles simultaneously. The player was given control in a way previous Resident Evil games had deliberately withheld. This seems like it should reduce horror, right? Knowledge is comfort. Visibility removes mystery. If you can see everything clearly, where's the dread? But Resident Evil 4 found horror in different places. Instead of spatial confusion, it created panic through overwhelming numbers. Instead of not seeing the threat, it made the threat too numerous to handle despite seeing it clearly. The camera gave you control, but the game ensured you never felt truly in control of the situation. The influence of this camera system cannot be overstated. Within 2 years, Epic Games released Gears of War, which explicitly took inspiration from Resident Evil 4's over-the-shoulder perspective. Gears added a cover system and refined the formula for pure action, becoming the template for third-person shooters throughout the 7th generation of consoles. Cliff Bleszinski, Gears' lead designer, openly credited Resident Evil 4 with showing them how third-person combat should feel. Dead Space in 2008 took the camera and applied it back to survival horror in space, essentially becoming Resident Evil 4 in space, as developers openly acknowledged. Uncharted used it for adventure action. The Last of Us used it for narrative-driven survival. God of War's 2018 reboot abandoned fixed cinematic cameras for an over-the-shoulder perspective directly influenced by Resident Evil 4. Grand Theft Auto, Mass Effect, even The Legend of Zelda, Breath of the Wild used over-the-shoulder aiming for precise actions. Batman Arkham Asylum, Fallout 3, Ratchet and Clank. The list of games influenced by this camera system is staggering. In 2019, Game Informer called Resident Evil 4 the most important third-person shooter ever, noting that it innovated 2 genres by creating a camera system that worked equally well for horror and action. That one design decision, putting the camera behind the player's shoulder, became the industry standard for how third-person games handle aiming, exploration, and spatial awareness. It's so ubiquitous now that players under 25 might not even realize it wasn't always the standard. The irony is that Mikami and his team considered it a natural evolution, not a revolution. They were solving their game's needs. But sometimes the most important innovations happen when developers stop trying to innovate and just build what feels right. The over-the-shoulder camera felt right, and it changed gaming forever. Breaking Rule 2, the enemy that thinks zombies in Resident Evil were predictable. They moved slowly, lunged at specific distances, could be dodged with proper timing. Cerberuses, the zombie dogs, ran faster but followed patterns. Hunters jumped and slashed but telegraphed their attacks. Even Mr. X and Nemesis, the stalker enemies, operated on routines you could learn. This was essential design for survival horror. The player needed to master enemy behavior to survive resource scarcity. You learned zombie pathing through hallways. You memorized which rooms contained which enemies. You developed strategies, Lead this zombie to this position. Dodge past this pack. Use one shotgun shell to clear this group. The enemies were threats, absolutely, but they were predictable threats. Mastery was possible and rewarded. Speedrunners eventually completed Resident Evil games in under 2 hours by perfectly executing dodges and knowing exact enemy placements. This mastery was part of the satisfaction. Survival horror asked you to become expert at threat management. The first time through a game was terrifying. The fifth time through you were efficient, confident, executing perfect strategies. The journey from panic to mastery was the core experience. Resident Evil 4 introduced ganados, and ganados don't follow patterns the way zombies do. The name means cattle in Spanish, and the villagers infected with Las Plagas parasites are livestock to the cult Los Illuminados. But they're intelligent livestock. They retain their cognitive abilities, their coordination, their capacity for strategy. This fundamentally changes combat from pattern recognition to tactical response. Ganados communicate. You hear them shouting to each other in Spanish, coordinating attacks. They don't just shamble toward you. They flank. They coordinate. They use the environment. See a group of ganados ahead? They might split up, some taking the direct route, while others circle around to attack from the sides or rear. They throw axes, hurl scythes, lob dynamite. Some carry pitchforks and charge. Others have chainsaws and can kill you instantly if they connect. The famous opening village sequence demonstrates this immediately. You enter the village center, and dozens of ganados converge. They're not mindlessly walking toward you. They're problem-solving. Some climb ladders to second floors to attack from above. Others grab farming equipment to use as weapons. They set fire to structures and throw torches. They bring in the chainsaw man, Dr. Salvador, a particularly durable ganado who can decapitate you with one hit. The sequence is designed to create panic, not through limitation, but through overwhelming tactical threat. You can fight strategically. Shoot a leg to stagger an enemy, then run up and kick them, knocking back entire groups. Shoot their weapons out of their hands. Target explosive barrels to take out clusters. Use the environment, climb a ladder and kick it down. Shoot a hanging bell to create distractions. Position yourself in doorways to create choke points. The game gives you tools and expects you to use them tactically, rather than just conserve resources. This is a radical departure. Previous Resident Evil games were about restriction, limited ammo, limited health, every encounter a resource tax. Resident Evil 4 is about management. You usually have enough resources if you use them intelligently. The merchant appears throughout the game selling weapons, ammunition, and healing items. You find treasure to sell for currency. The attaché case inventory system lets you organize your tools efficiently, rather than constantly juggling the 3-item limitation of earlier games. The game makes you powerful. Leon has an arsenal: pistols, shotguns, rifles, magnums, grenades, rocket launchers. Weapons can be upgraded at the merchant, improving firepower, capacity, reload speed. By the end game, Leon is carrying more firepower than the entire STARS team combined across the first 3 games. This should eliminate horror, right? Power is comfort. If you're well armed, you're not scared. But Resident Evil 4 compensates by throwing more at you. The village siege isn't just a few zombies, it's dozens of coordinated ganados. The castle has cultists with crossbows, shields, flails, all working together. The island has military ganados with better equipment, formation tactics, some wearing armor. The game escalates enemy sophistication alongside player power, maintaining pressure throughout. The Plaga transformation adds unpredictability. Shoot a ganado in the head enough times, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, their head splits open and a writhing tentacled plaga emerges. These plaga variants have different attacks. Some have blade-like appendages that slice horizontally. Some have mouths that bite if you get close. Some are spider-like and can detach from the body to jump at you independently. Flash grenades instantly kill exposed plagas, which gives you options but requires you to recognize the transformation and respond quickly. This unpredictability prevents pattern memorization. You can't just learn, this enemy takes 3 shots, because sometimes that third shot triggers a plaga emergence that creates a more dangerous enemy. Sometimes it doesn't. The variance keeps you reactive rather than rote. Even on multiple playthroughs, combat situations don't play out identically because enemy behavior has built-in variation. Boss enemies extend this intelligent opposition. Del Lago, the mutated lake monster, requires pattern recognition. Harpoon it when it surfaces, but also adds tension through cinematic quick-time events when it drags the boat. El Gigante, the giant troll creature, can grab and eat you whole, but strategic play lets you attack the plaga parasite on its back for massive damage. Enemies are challenges requiring specific approaches rather than just resource taxes. Later games tried to replicate this but often missed what made it work. Resident Evil 5 and 6 increased enemy numbers but removed the tactical positioning importance, becoming more about shooting hordes than outmaneuvering threats. Dead Space understood it. Necromorphs required strategic dismemberment, creating similar think about your shots gameplay. The Last of Us borrowed the resource management with intelligent enemies concept, but few games balance player power against enemy intelligence as perfectly as Resident Evil 4. The rule being broken here is fundamental. Survival horror enemies should be predictable threat taxes that teach mastery through repetition. Resident Evil 4 said no. Enemies should be tactical problems, requiring adaptive solutions. The shift from pattern recognition to tactical response transformed what survival horror combat could be. Breaking Rule 3, momentum over atmosphere. Previous Resident Evil games were designed around tension through exploration. You'd enter a new area, a hallway, a room, a corridor, and scan for threats, items, puzzles. The pacing was methodical. You cleared spaces carefully, checking every angle, because you never knew when a zombie might burst through a window or lunge from around a corner. Most of your time was spent walking, investigating, reading documents, solving puzzles. Combat was punctuation, not constant. This created a specific rhythm, tension building through quiet exploration, punctuated by sudden combat, followed by more tense exploration. Safe rooms provided relief. These were spaces enemies couldn't enter, where you could save, manage inventory, catch your breath. The game breathed. It had rest states. Resident Evil 4 replaces this breathing rhythm with constant forward momentum. The game is always pushing you ahead. The opening village siege is followed immediately by escape through the church and forest. You rescue Ashley and immediately face pursuit. The castle is maze-like, but you're always moving toward an exit while being pushed by enemy encounters. The island is similar, constant motion, constant escalation. There are still puzzles, but they're simpler and faster than earlier games. Earlier Resident Evil games had multi-step puzzles, requiring you to explore large areas to find components. Resident Evil 4's puzzles are usually local. Find the right item in this immediate area to unlock the next section. The focus is keeping momentum rather than creating spatial mastery. You're not learning the geography intimately because you're pushed through too quickly to memorize paths. This changes the horror from anticipatory dread to pressure. In earlier Resident Evil games, you were scared of what might be around the corner. In Resident Evil 4, you're overwhelmed by what's already attacking you. The horror is present and aggressive rather than potential and atmospheric. When you're in the village center and granados are streaming in from every building while Dr. Salvador's chainsaw revs behind you, there's no time for atmospheric dread. You're in immediate crisis. The level design supports this momentum. Previous games use backtracking extensively. You'd unlock new areas but need to return to old ones with new keys or abilities. Resident Evil 4 is much more linear. You move through areas sequentially and rarely return. There are optional treasures to find, but the main path is forward. This is conscious design to maintain pace. The game doesn't want you settling into spaces and learning them intimately. It wants you moving, reacting, adapting to new environments constantly. Even the structure reflects this. The game is divided into clear acts: the village, the castle, the island, each with distinct aesthetics and escalating intensity. The village is rural horror, farming implements, and rustic structures. The castle is gothic, with zealots in robes and medieval weaponry. The island is industrial military, with fortified positions and soldiers. This variety keeps the experience fresh, but also prevents any one location from becoming familiar and therefore less threatening. Quick-time events contribute to this momentum. Love them or hate them, quick-time events in Resident Evil 4 keep you alert during what would traditionally be downtime. A cutscene plays, but suddenly you need to press a button or you'll be killed. You're walking down a corridor and boulders roll toward you, requiring timed button presses. Leon and Krauser's knife fight is entirely quick-time events based. These moments remove the expectation that cutscenes or traversal are safe. Every moment could demand instant response. This was controversial. The 2023 remake significantly reduced quick-time events because modern game design has largely abandoned them as a crutch, and many players find them intrusive. But in 2005, they were novel and effectively maintained pressure. You couldn't relax during cinematics. You couldn't breathe during transitions. The game kept your finger near the button at all times. Compare this to Silent Hill's pacing, which is almost the opposite. Silent Hill 2 lets you walk fog-covered streets for long stretches with no threats. The game trusts that the atmosphere, the fog, the sound design, the unsettling environments creates enough tension without constant enemy encounters. Exploration is slow, methodical, psychological. The horror comes from mood and implication rather than immediate threat. Resident Evil 4 doesn't trust mood alone. It maintains pressure mechanically. Health depletes during combat, forcing you to heal and use resources. Ammunition expenditure is constant. Ashley, the president's daughter you're escorting through much of the game, can be grabbed by enemies and carried away, forcing you to rescue her quickly. The game creates constant small crises that keep you engaged mechanically rather than atmospherically. This shift from atmosphere to momentum influenced the evolution of action games broadly. Games like Uncharted took this structure and ran with it. Constant forward movement through set pieces, with combat encounters linked by traversal and light puzzles. God of War's reboot maintained this pace with the over-the-shoulder camera providing both intimacy and action. Even Doom 2016's push-forward combat philosophy, where staying aggressive is rewarded, echoes Resident Evil 4's lesson that momentum creates its own kind of tension. The rule being broken, survival horror should create dread through anticipation and atmosphere. Resident Evil 4 said no. Action and pressure can be terrifying in their own right if the pace never lets you settle. The shift from dread to immediate crisis broadened what horror games could be. Breaking Rule 4. The escort mission that worked. Escort missions are gaming's most hated mechanic. The AI companion you must protect is invariably stupid, getting in your way, running into danger, requiring constant babysitting. Protecting NPCs should create emotional stakes. You care about them, so protecting them means something, but usually it just creates frustration. The companion becomes an obstacle rather than a companion. Resident Evil 4 spends much of its runtime as an escort mission. After the opening village sequence, Leon rescues Ashley Graham, the president's daughter, kidnapped by Los Illuminados. From that point until near the end, Ashley is with you through most levels. You must protect her, because if enemies grab her and carry her away far enough, it's game over. She's a non-combatant who can't defend herself, making her pure liability in gameplay terms. This should be miserable. Everything about escort mission design typically fails. Bad AI pathfinding, companion getting stuck on geometry, companion running into enemy fire, companion making noise at stealth sections. Yet somehow, Resident Evil 4's escort sections largely work. Why? First, Ashley is designed with minimal frustration. She follows closely but not obnoxiously. She ducks when you aim, ensuring she's not in your line of fire. She hides in designated spots when told, removing herself from combat when appropriate. Her AI is specifically programmed to avoid being annoying. She doesn't trigger enemies, doesn't block doorways, doesn't run ahead into danger. The team clearly play-tested extensively to remove friction points. Second, the game designs encounters around escort dynamics. Puzzles require splitting up. Ashley can fit through small spaces to unlock doors. Combat areas provide hiding spots, dumpsters, rooms, where you can tell Ashley to wait while you clear threats. Some sections separate you temporarily, giving you breaks from escort duty. The design acknowledges that constant babysitting is exhausting and provides relief valves. Third, Ashley adds strategic complexity rather than just being dead weight. Enemies try to grab and carry her, which creates new priorities mid-combat. You're not just fighting for yourself, you need to keep enemies away from her. This creates interesting positioning challenges. Some areas have high platforms where enemies throw ladders down. If Ashley's grabbed and carried up there, you need to climb and retrieve her while under fire. The escort becomes a puzzle element. Fourth, Ashley develops characterization. She's not just a damsel in distress trophy. She has personality, comments on situations, makes jokes, questions what's happening. The 2023 remake expanded this significantly, giving Ashley actual agency and partnership dynamics with Leon, but even the original avoided making her just a passive objective. She reacts to horror, makes observations, participates in the story rather than just being cargo. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, Ashley creates vulnerability in a game where Leon is otherwise extremely capable. When you're controlling Leon alone, you're a skilled agent with firepower. When Ashley's with you, suddenly you're responsible for someone defenseless. The escort mechanic reintroduces the vulnerability that the empowered combat otherwise removed. You're not scared for yourself, you're scared for her. The famous castle section where you must protect Ashley alone while she operates cranks to open gates demonstrates this perfectly. Leon is separated, and you control Ashley directly as enemies pursue her. She has zero combat abilities. You can only run, hide, and solve the mechanical puzzle. This reversal, playing as the escort target, creates pure panic. You understand viscerally why escort missions are stressful because you experience the helplessness directly. Then, when Leon returns and you control him again, the relief is palpable. You have your weapons back, your skills, your agency. The contrast makes you appreciate Leon's capabilities while also making you vigilant about Ashley's safety. It's remarkably effective character perspective, shifting that most games never attempt. The remake improved this further by removing Ashley's health bar. She can't take damage and die, only be grabbed and carried, which eliminated the frustration of her taking stray shots during combat. She also gained more mobility options and the ability to help in combat situations by throwing objects. The improvements show that the core concept was sound. It just needed refinement. Other games tried escort missions after Resident Evil 4 with varying success. BioShock Infinite's Elizabeth was designed to never be a burden. She couldn't take damage, couldn't block your movement, actually helped by tossing supplies. The Last of Us made Ellie essential to the emotional narrative, and her AI was programmed extensively to avoid frustrating behaviors. These games learned from Resident Evil 4's lessons about escort design, but many games got it wrong. Missions where NPCs run ahead into danger, where they block doorways during combat, where protecting them feels punitive rather than strategic. These remain common. The difference is in the design philosophy. Resident Evil 4 made Ashley part of the tactical puzzle, not just a mobile health bar you had to monitor. She was designed to work with the game's flow rather than against it. The rule being broken, escort missions are inherently frustrating and should be avoided. Resident Evil 4 said no. Escorts can add vulnerability and strategic complexity if designed carefully around minimizing frustration. The success of Ashley as a gameplay element influenced how companion AI was designed in subsequent games. The Merchant and the Economy of Horror. Previous Resident Evil games treated item scarcity as sacred. You found what you found in the environment. There was no store, no shop, no economy, just careful exploration and resource management of limited supplies. This scarcity was fundamental to the horror. Knowing you had 3 shotgun shells left created constant anxiety. Do I use them now or save them? What if something worse appears later? Resident Evil 4 introduces the Merchant, a mysterious figure who appears throughout the game at lamplight stations. His greeting, "What are you buying?" became iconic. He sells weapons, ammunition, healing items, and most importantly, weapon upgrades. You sell him treasures you find during exploration, which serves no purpose except as currency. There's an entire economy where you hunt for treasure, sell it to the merchant, use that money to buy better equipment. This should destroy survival horror's tension, right? If you can buy ammunition, you can never truly run out. If you can upgrade weapons to be more powerful, you can overcome challenges through better equipment rather than skilled play. The merchant seems antithetical to resource scarcity, the bedrock of the genre Resident Evil invented. But the economy creates different tension, optimization pressure. You can't buy everything, so you must decide what to prioritize. Do you upgrade your pistol for consistent damage, or save money for a better weapon later? Do you buy ammunition now, or hunt for treasure to afford that capacity upgrade that provides better long-term value? The decisions shift from, can I afford to use this resource, to how do I optimize my build for upcoming challenges? The attaché case inventory system feeds this. Unlike previous games where you juggled a 3-item limit or had separate weapon and item inventories, Resident Evil 4 gives you a grid-based case where items take up different numbers of spaces. Tetris-style organization becomes part of the experience. Weapons can be rotated to fit better. Treasure items are often odd shapes requiring clever arrangement. You can buy larger cases from the merchant expanding capacity, but careful organization is always necessary. This transforms resource management from pure scarcity to spatial efficiency and economic optimization. You're not necessarily short on resources, but you're short on space and money. Do you hold on to that treasure to combine with another piece for higher value, or sell it now for immediate purchasing power? Do you carry multiple weapon types for flexibility, or specialize to carry more ammunition for fewer weapons? The decisions are constant but different from traditional survival horror's binary use or conserve choices. Weapon variety adds depth. The starting pistol is serviceable but upgradable. Shotguns provide close-range power. Rifles allow distant precision. Magnums deliver devastating single shots. The broken butterfly magnum, the striker shotgun, the semi-automatic rifle, each weapon has unique characteristics, upgrade paths, and tactical applications. Finding which weapons suit your playstyle becomes part of the experience. The merchant's presence also provides pacing relief. His lamplight stations become sanctuaries where enemies don't appear. You can organize inventory, sell treasure, upgrade weapons, and breathe before the next section. He's the equivalent of safe rooms in earlier games, providing mechanical and psychological rest points. His mysterious nature, who is he, why does he help Leon, how does he appear in impossible locations, adds to the game's strange tone without requiring explanation. Treasure hunting adds an exploration incentive separate from survival. Finding all the bejeweled treasures, the Castellan medallions, the elegant crowns becomes a meta game. Some treasures combine. The butterfly lamp needs 3 gems slotted into it, increasing its value significantly if you find all pieces. This creates optional scavenger hunt gameplay that rewards thorough exploration without being mandatory for completion. You can rush through and succeed, but treasure hunting provides economic advantages. The economy also allows player expression. Speedrunners minimize purchases and sell everything to afford only essential upgrades. Casual players might buy every weapon to experiment. Challenge runners impose restrictions. Pistol only, no merchant, knife only. The system's flexibility enables different approaches, creating replayability through build variety rather than just different routes or endings. Critics of Resident Evil 4 often point to the merchant as evidence the game abandoned survival horror completely. If you can buy your way out of resource problems, where's the survival? But this misunderstands the tension the economy creates. You're not scared of running out of ammunition. You're scared of being caught unprepared because you made poor purchasing decisions. You're anxious about upcoming sections because you're unsure if your current loadout is adequate. The fear shifts from immediate scarcity to anticipatory unpreparedness. Later games adopted shop system with varying success. Dead Space had stores at save points, similar in function to Resident Evil 4's merchant. The evil within included merchants. But some survival horror games rejected this entirely. Resident Evil 7 returned to pure scarcity, and the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes had no merchant system. The 2023 Resident Evil 4 remake kept the merchant because he's inseparable from the game's identity, improving the UI and expanding his commentary. The merchant also became a meme, which speaks to his cultural impact. "What are you buying?" became shorthand for aggressive capitalism in gaming discussions. His character design, the mysterious face, the Cockney-ish accent, the impossible appearances, captured imaginations beyond just gameplay function. He's as iconic to Resident Evil 4 as any major character. The rule being broken, survival horror requires absolute resource scarcity to maintain tension. Resident Evil 4 said no. Economic systems and optimization can create different but equally valid tension if designed around strategic spending rather than pure conservation. The merchant system influenced how action horror games approach resource management going forward. The village, the castle, the island, 3 games. In one, Resident Evil games traditionally use single large locations, the mansion, the police station, the Antarctic facility, that you explored thoroughly, unlocking new areas as you progressed, but always within one cohesive space. This created geographic mastery. You learned the layout, developed efficient routes, understood where things were. The location became familiar, which created comfort even amid horror. Resident Evil 4 structures itself in 3 distinct acts with completely different aesthetics, enemy types, and gameplay emphases. This prevents the familiarity that would breed comfort. Just as you're adapting to one environment and enemy type, the game shifts everything. The village section establishes the game's identity: rural Spanish countryside, rustic structures, farming equipment repurposed as weapons. The ganados here are villagers, farmers, workers, ordinary people infected with Las Plagas. They speak Spanish, wear work clothes, and inhabit spaces that feel lived in. The environments are outdoor focused: streets, houses, barns, farm fields. Combat happens in open areas where you must manage sight lines and positioning against groups. This section introduces all core mechanics: the over-the-shoulder camera, laser aiming, dynamic enemy behavior, the merchant, Ashley escort, boss fights. It's the foundational experience lasting several hours. The village chief, Bitoris Mendez, serves as the area's climactic boss, a towering figure whose plaga mutation transforms him into a centipede-like horror with extending vertebrae that grab and crush. Then the castle fundamentally changes the aesthetic: Gothic architecture, stone halls, religious iconography. The ganados become zealots in robes rather than farmers in work clothes. They wield medieval weapons, crossbows, flails, shields, rather than farming tools. The environments shift indoor, becoming maze-like with puzzles involving cranks, gears, paintings, classic adventure game structure. Ramon Salazar presides over this section, a Castellan whose family sealed Las Plagas centuries ago before he was manipulated into releasing them. He's diminutive physically but commands vast resources and engineered monstrosities. The castle introduces new enemy types: the Garador, blind armored creatures with Wolverine-like claws that hunt by sound; the Novistadors, invisible insect-human hybrids that work in swarms. The pacing changes: less open combat, more navigating tight corridors and avoiding traps. The Ashley escort reaches its peak in the castle, with sections separating Leon and Ashley, requiring her to navigate alone. The castle's water hall, where Ashley operates cranks to rotate bridges while Leon protects her from a distance with a rifle, demonstrates the game's willingness to vary gameplay completely. Its tower defense, then solo stealth, then frantic escort, then boss fight, all within one location. Salazar's boss fight epitomizes the castle's grotesque horror. He merges with his right-hand man and a large tentacled creature, becoming a massive amalgamation that must be fought on a platform over a pit. The fight requires precise shooting while avoiding sweeping tentacle attacks. It's climactic and gross and absurd in the way only Resident Evil 4 can be, taking itself seriously while also reveling in B-movie body horror. The island is the final act and the most controversial. The aesthetics shift again to industrial military, fortifications, communication towers, laboratories, military compounds. The ganados become soldiers, fully equipped with tactical gear. They're more aggressive, better equipped, harder to kill. Some wear armor, requiring you to target weak points. The island feels like you've entered an action movie's third act. Everything escalates to pure spectacle. This section introduces the most grotesque enemies. Regenerators are pale, heavy-breathing creatures that regenerate from any damage unless you destroy the Plaga's parasites embedded in their bodies, which are only visible through thermal scope. Iron Maidens are regenerators covered in spikes that extend when you're close. These enemies can't be fought conventionally. You need the right equipment and knowledge to defeat them efficiently. Otherwise, they're nearly invulnerable damage sponges. The island's encounters are the most intense. You defend a base from waves of ganados, operating mounted guns and throwing back dynamite. You navigate underground tunnels with instant kill traps. You face miniguns and armored enemies. It's relentless, pushing the action elements to their limit. Some fans feel the island goes too far into action, losing the horror action balance the village and castle maintained. Others love it as a balls to the wall climax. The final confrontation with Osmond Sadler, the cult's leader who orchestrated everything, brings body horror to its extreme. Sadler transforms into a grotesque, spider-like monstrosity of limbs and plaga matter. The fight happens in a high-tech area with laser grids and construction equipment. Ada Wong, who's been appearing throughout as mysterious ally, tosses Leon a rocket launcher for the finishing blow. It's cinematic, absurd, and perfectly encapsulates Resident Evil 4's tone, serious horror with winking self-awareness. This three-act structure prevents habituation. Just when you've mastered village combat, the castle changes everything. Just when you've adapted to castle navigation, the island ramps up intensity. Each section feels like a mini-game with its own identity, preventing the experience from feeling monotonous across its 15-20-hour runtime. Other games adopted this structure. Uncharted uses distinctly different locations per chapter: jungle, desert, mountains, keeping variety high. The Last of Us moves through seasons and environments continuously. Even the Resident Evil 2 remake, returning to fixed location design, uses the A-B scenario structure and sewer/lab sections to vary the experience across different acts. The rule being broken, survival horror should create mastery of one location that becomes familiar. Resident Evil 4 said no. Constant environmental reinvention prevents comfort and maintains novelty across lengthy runtime. The three-act structure became a template for how action horror games maintain pacing. Quick time events, the 2005 innovation that aged poorly. Quick time events weren't invented by Resident Evil 4. They trace back to Dragon's Lair and were popularized by Shenmue and God of War. But Resident Evil 4 integrated them throughout the experience in ways that kept players alert during what would traditionally be passive moments. Walking through a door, suddenly you need to tap a button rapidly as Ganados try to break through from the other side. Watching a cutscene, a prompt appears requiring instant button press or Leon dies. The knife fight with Jack Krauser, Leon's former military companion turned enemy, is entirely QTE based, a rapid exchange of button prompts simulating a close quarters duel. The most famous QTE is the boulder sequence. You're running down a narrow path and massive boulders roll toward you. Button prompts appear requiring timed presses to dodge left or right. Miss one and you're crushed, watching Leon die and restarting from the last checkpoint. It's cinematic, intense, and infuriating all at once. In 2005, this felt novel. QTEs added interactivity to moments that would traditionally be cutscenes or corridor running. They demanded attention at all times. You couldn't zone out during cinematics or traversal. They created tension through reflex testing rather than resource management or combat skill. Some moments, like the QTE to avoid a bear trap in the water, became iconic precisely because they surprised players who weren't expecting interaction. The system had problems, even then. The button prompts were sometimes unclear. Is that a button mash or a timed press? The timing windows could be strict, especially on higher difficulties. Missing a QTE often meant instant death and replaying the entire sequence. For players with accessibility issues, QTEs could be barriers that made sections impossible to complete. But the bigger issue was what happened after 2005. Other games saw Resident Evil 4's critical and commercial success and assumed QTEs were part of why it worked. The seventh generation of consoles became plagued with QTE overuse. Games inserted them into every cinematic moment. Entire boss fights became QTE sequences. God of War's sequels relied on them heavily. Even narrative games like Heavy Rain and Beyond. Two Souls built their entire gameplay around extended QTE sequences. The novelty wore off quickly. By 2010, players were tired of QTEs. They felt like false interactivity. Pressing a button when prompted isn't meaningful gameplay, it's Simon Says. The mechanic that made Resident Evil 4 feel dynamic made other games feel restrictive and patronizing. QTEs became shorthand for lazy design, a way to insert gameplay into cutscenes without actually designing interactive sequences. The 2023 Resident Evil 4 remake addressed this by removing or redesigning most QTEs. The Krauser knife fight became an actual parry-based combat encounter, using the knife parry mechanic introduced for blocking regular attacks. The Boulder Run became a standard gameplay sequence without sudden prompts. Contextual actions that made sense, dodging an attack, catching a weapon, remained, but arbitrary press button now moments were eliminated. Directors Yasuhiro Ampo and Kazunori Kodoi explained their reasoning in interviews. Modern players don't enjoy QTs the way audiences did in 2005. Gaming has evolved. The mechanic that felt innovative 20 years ago feels dated now. Removing them preserved the game's pacing without the frustration of failed QTE deaths. This evolution highlights an important lesson about innovation. What works in one era doesn't necessarily work forever. Resident Evil 4's QTEs were right for 2005, maintaining tension through a novel mechanic. By 2023, that same mechanic felt antiquated. The remake kept what aged well, the camera, the combat, the pacing, and updated what didn't. That's how classics stay relevant. The rule being broken in 2005, cutscenes and traversal are passive downtime where players observe rather than interact. Resident Evil 4 said no. Every moment should demand attention and readiness to act. This influenced years of game design before the industry recognized that constant QTE pressure wasn't actually the best solution to maintaining engagement. Breaking Rule 5, the tone that shouldn't work. Resident Evil 1 through 3 took themselves seriously, mostly. The voice acting was often hilariously bad. Jill Sandwich, master of unlocking, but the games played their horror straight. The situations were dire. The corporation was evil. The monsters were threatening. The atmosphere was oppressive. Even the camp elements felt unintentional, products of translation and budget limitations rather than deliberate tonal choices. Resident Evil 4 winks at the camera constantly while maintaining genuine tension. Leon delivers one-liners that would make action heroes jealous. When a villager tries to attack with a pitchfork, Leon quips, "Where's everyone going? Bingo?" The dialogue is intentionally cheesy, playing with B-movie conventions while still creating real stakes. The merchant's "What are you buying?" is goofy, yet somehow doesn't break immersion. This tonal balance is incredibly difficult to achieve. Too serious, and the absurd enemy designs, giant robot statues, cultists in medieval armor, the Las Plagas tentacle bursts would feel ridiculous. Too campy, and the horror loses impact. Resident Evil 4 finds the exact middle ground where Leon's cool quips and the game's self-awareness enhance rather than undermine the horror. Consider Luis Serra, the Spanish researcher who helps Leon. He's charming, sleazy, funny, tragic, all at once. His flirtation with Ashley, his banter with Leon, his reveal that he worked for the cult and now seeks redemption, his death trying to deliver suppressants for the Las Plagas infection. The character is ridiculous and genuine simultaneously. His final scene, coughing blood after being stabbed by Sadler, hits emotionally despite the absurdity surrounding it. Or Ramon Salazar, the Castellan. He's a short man who looks like a child but acts with aristocratic pompousness. He rides on a massive creature's shoulder like a fantasy villain. His dialogue is flowery and theatrical. He should be a joke, but the game treats him seriously enough that he remains threatening. When he says, "I've sent my right hand to dispose of you," before unleashing the Verdugo boss, it's both campy and genuinely ominous. The game's visual design embraces this duality. The Regenerators are horrifying, pale naked humanoids that breathe heavily and regenerate from damage, with unsettling animations. But they're also absurd. Fighting them requires a thermal scope to see hidden parasites and shooting those specific points. It's survival horror meets arcade precision shooting. The tension is real, but the mechanics are gamey in a way that acknowledges you're playing a video game. Boss designs exemplify this. Del Lago is a massive mutated salamander in a lake that Leon fights with harpoons from a boat. It's tense and thrilling, but also clearly inspired by Jaws in ways the game doesn't hide. El Gigante is a troll with a plaga parasite on its back that you can climb and attack Shadow of the Colossus style. The fights are cinematic set pieces that balance spectacle with challenge. The game's sense of humor about itself shows in optional elements. Shooting all the Mikami dolls hidden throughout unlocks bonuses. The professional difficulty is deliberately punishing in ways that feel like developer trolling. The Mercenaries mode, unlocked after completion, is pure arcade score attack with no story pretense. The unlockable weapons include infinite ammunition, rocket launchers, and laser guns. The game knows it's a game. This tonal approach influenced countless titles. Uncharted built its entire identity on balancing sincere adventure with action hero quips. The Last of Us used humor between Joel and Ellie to contrast the horror. Even the Resident Evil series itself learned from RE4's success. Resident Evil 5 and 6 tried to replicate it but leaned too far into action cheese without the horror foundation. Resident Evil 7 and 8 brought back horror but kept character personality and self-awareness. The remake faced interesting challenges here. Modern voice acting and motion capture create different expectations than 2005's theatrical delivery. The remake's Leon is still quippy, but more naturalistic. Ashley has actual characterization rather than just reactive screaming. The tone is slightly more grounded while keeping the essential, serious but not too serious balance. The rule being broken, horror games must maintain consistent tone to preserve fear. Resident Evil 4 said no. Tonal flexibility and self-awareness can enhance rather than undermine horror if the stakes remain real underneath the camp. This opens space for horror games to have personality beyond just oppressive atmosphere. The impact that reshaped an industry. When Resident Evil 4 released in January 2005 as a GameCube exclusive, reviews were immediately ecstatic. perfect scores poured in. Game of the Year awards accumulated rapidly. Within months, Capcom announced a PlayStation 2 port, breaking the exclusivity deal. The PS2 version added new content, the Separate Ways campaign following Ada Wong, new costumes, additional weapons. A PC port followed in 2007, then Wii with motion controls, then HD versions on Xbox 360 and PS3, then more HD versions on PS4 and Xbox One, then again on modern consoles and mobile devices. The game kept selling across generations, eventually moving over 14 million copies across all platforms. Extraordinary longevity. But more important than sales was influence. Resident Evil 4 redefined third-person action horror so completely that the game's design language became industry standard. Gears of War launched less than 2 years later in 2006, and Epic Games' Cliff Bleszinski explicitly credited Resident Evil 4 for inspiring its over-the-shoulder perspective and focus on tactical positioning. Gears added a robust cover system and created the third-person cover shooter genre that dominated the Xbox 360 and PS3 era. While Gears felt nothing like RE4 in tone or horror, its mechanical foundation came directly from Capcom's game. Dead Space arrived in 2008, and developers openly called it Resident Evil 4 in space. The dismemberment combat, strategic aiming, over-the-shoulder camera, and upgrade systems were RE4's DNA transplanted to a sci-fi horror setting. Ben Wannett and Wright Bagwell, Dead Space's designers, stated their game was originally planned as System Shock 3, until Resident Evil 4's release inspired them to completely redesign it. Dead Space became its own influential franchise, but it existed because RE4 showed what horror in third-person action could be. Uncharted borrowed the camera system and environmental traversal rhythm. The Last of Us took the resource management, escort dynamics, and balance of action and horror. BioShock drew from its approach to environmental storytelling and combat design. God of War's 2018 reboot abandoned fixed cinematic cameras for over-the-shoulder perspective explicitly because Resident Evil 4 proved it worked for intimate storytelling. Even outside horror and action, RE4's influence spread. Grand Theft Auto added precision aiming with over-the-shoulder view. Mass Effect used it for combat. Fallout 3 incorporated it. The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild used it for bow aiming. Batman, Arkham Asylum, Ratchet and Clank, countless others, the over-the-shoulder precision aim became standard language for how third-person games handle targeting. It's so ubiquitous now that young players might not realize it originated from one specific game in 2005. Some criticize Resident Evil 4 for killing survival horror, arguing it popularized action horror hybrids that diluted the genre. This criticism isn't entirely unfair. RE4's success did lead to years of horror games, emphasizing action over atmosphere. Silent Hill, Homecoming tried to replicate RE4's combat and failed to capture what made either franchise special. Alone in the Dark's 2008 reboot chased action trends poorly. Publishers saw RE4 sales and demanded action from horror franchises that weren't suited for it. But Resident Evil 4 didn't kill survival horror, it evolved it. The genre needed evolution. By 2005, fixed cameras and tank controls felt archaic. Resource scarcity without mechanical variety was becoming rote. RE4 showed that horror could adapt to modern design expectations without losing its identity. Later games like Amnesia, Outlast, and Alien Isolation proved pure horror still worked, creating new subgenres. The survival horror genre became more diverse because RE4 demonstrated flexibility. The rule being broken, franchises should refine their formula, not reinvent it. Resident Evil 4 said no. Sometimes burning everything down and starting fresh is necessary for relevance and longevity. The commercial and critical success validated that risk, influencing how developers approach franchise evolution. Conclusion: the legacy of breaking everything. Resident Evil 4 arrived in 2005 and changed what action games, horror games, and third-person games could be. It broke rules deliberately and successfully, proving that genre conventions exist to serve goals, and when your goals change, every convention should be questioned. Give players control instead of restricting them. Make enemies intelligent instead of predictable. Maintain momentum instead of building atmosphere slowly. Turn escort missions into strategic elements instead of frustrations. Add economies instead of pure scarcity. Vary environments completely instead of creating single location mastery. Make it campy and serious simultaneously instead of choosing one tone. These weren't just different choices, they were opposite choices, inversions of everything survival horror had established as fundamental. The influence reverberates through every third-person game released since. The camera system became standard. The enemy design philosophy spread to countless action games. The pacing structure influenced narrative-driven experiences. Even the things that didn't age well, the QTEs, some dated mechanics, influenced years of development before the industry moved past them. The series itself had a complicated relationship with RE4's legacy. Resident Evil 5 and 6 chased action trends too aggressively and faced backlash. Resident Evil 7 returned to pure horror. The remakes of RE2 and RE3 applied RE4's camera to classic scenarios. Village blended horror and action carefully. The 2023 RE4 remake proved the original design still works when modernized thoughtfully, but the influence extended far beyond Resident Evil. Dead Space wouldn't exist without it. Gears of War's cover shooting built on its foundation. Uncharted cinematic action learned from its pacing. The Last of Us's escorting and resource management drew directly from it. God of War's 2018 reboot adopted its camera. Dozens of games across genres incorporated lessons about precision aiming, tactical positioning, and dynamic cameras. Most importantly, Resident Evil 4 proved that reinvention could work better than refinement. Sometimes a franchise needs to burn its established formula completely and build something new from the ashes. Sometimes honoring what came before means having the courage to move past it. Sometimes the best sequel is the one that breaks all the rules. 20 years later, games are still learning from Resident Evil 4's lessons. New action horror titles study its balance of empowerment and tension. Third-person games reference its camera system as the foundation they're building on. Designers cite it when discussing how to create memorable set pieces, how to pace lengthy campaigns, how to make escorts tolerable, how to balance camp and horror. The game that took 6 years and 4 scrapped versions to complete, that threw out everything Resident Evil had established, that gave players an over-the-shoulder camera and called it innovation, that made you powerful and still kept you scared, that let you buy ammunition but maintain tension anyway. That game changed interactive entertainment permanently. Resident Evil 4 didn't just break rules, it wrote new ones that dozens of games now follow. It proved that breaking everything can be the path to building something eternal.